Hello and welcome to the Wellsy Weekly Podcast, the show where I talk about anything and everything. My name is John, aka Wellsy, and today I want to talk about comic books, specifically Marvel and DC, because I'm a nerd and I like nerdy things, and them two, they're pretty popular in the whole nerd industry, and there's something that's always bugged me about them two things, and it's that they've got this rivalry. And you've got really hardcore fans that always say one's better than the other. And I don't think that's actually true necessarily. So today, I want to ask the question, which is better, Marvel or DC? And the way I'm going to approach this, I'm going to look at three different topics. The actual movies, the comic books, and the TV shows. Because that's what I've predominantly watched, seen, when interacted with these two companies. So I'm going to give my preferences on which I prefer, give some valid arguments for each, and then down below you can comment which you prefer, if there's one clear winner or if there's not. So let's start with the comic books. Now, admittedly, I haven't read a whole lot, and I've read a lot more Marvel than I have DC. That being said, I still really like comic books in general, because it's a good way to tell a story. They're enticing, they bring you into the world that they're trying to portray. And I don't like reading, I don't like words, so comic books are a good mixture of visual elements as well as, grabbing people into a story. And the fact that both companies, Marvel and DC, they've been going for years, they've told a lot of stories, some of them really good, some of them not so good. So if you look at DC's Watchmen, that's a story about, superheroes with, real life problems. It's a more realistic approach to superheroes as opposed to the Golden Age where it was all heroes could do anything, there was no limitations, there was no physics involved, there was no realistic aspect per se. And I think Watchmen is considered a brilliant story purely not from just the way the story is written and the way it plays out. It saw comic books in its industry and it flipped it on its head. I think that's what made it so popular. And then we can compare that to Marvel's Civil War, where they took the concept of heroes fighting each other, a concept that was breaking the norm in the comic books, added with a good storyline, and you've got a really exciting and grabbing story. But to say which one's better, I think a bit unfair on the company as a whole, because I think both companies have done, really good storylines, especially Watchmen, Civil War, Infinity Gauntlet, Kingdom Come, Long Halloween. So I'm not going to give any points to either company, Marvel or DC, purely because it depends on the writers, it depends on the story, and I think it depends on the time as well, because if it's something brand new, like say the death of Superman, that's never been done before. So it was groundbreaking, revolutionary. If you did it now, it probably wouldn't be as impactful, purely because it had been done in the past. So moving on. Now both Marvel and DC, they've tried to make movies, several movies in fact. You've got the whole MCU and you've got the DCEU, or the world of DC, or whatever they're calling it now. Now, personally, I think Marvel dominates in this aspect because they have movies that, intertwine and they're cohesive. They're telling one grand story over several movies. Whereas DC, they're more, independent movies, which is fine, for a normal movie, it's perfectly fine. There's been some great, independent DC films, Dark Knight trilogy, brilliant. But if you're relating that to comic books, characters interact with each other, they're all in one big universe per se. And I think Marvel gets that across in movie form a lot better than DC does. So in this aspect, I'd probably say Marvel are better than DC, purely at making films. Because a lot of DC films, what they've tried to do, they've tried to replicate Marvel, cohesive, interconnected universe, which you can't be done. You can't replicate what they've done. What they should do is work on independent films like the recent Joker or the brand new Suicide Squad, and just make a really good film, as opposed to, making everything fit and work together. Once you can establish that you can make, good movies, then maybe intertwine them, give references, to each film, and then eventually build up to a crossover. And Marvel does this a lot better. So when it comes to movies, I'd say Marvel are better than DC. Now, why I might think Marvel are dominating in the movie industry, I believe DC are actually better at TV shows, especially the Arrowverse. And the reason for it is, again, it's all interconnected, the shows cross over, it's all in one universe, they get that comic book feel to them. And the reason for this might be because it's all under the CW network, same as like the Marvel movies, they're all under one studio. So they get that feeling of it's an interconnected comic book universe where the laws in each comic or show or movie, they're all the same and they all follow the same rules. And I believe that cohesion is probably why it's so successful. And Marvel do have some good shows, don't get me wrong, I really like Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. But they don't take much from the comic books per se, they don't have like direct stories to adapt. Whereas the Defenders shows, they took characters from the comics, they tried to put it on the big screen, the small screen, and it just didn't seem to work. Whether that's because it's different writers, maybe it's got something to do with Netflix getting involved, I don't know all the ins and outs. But what I do know is I definitely prefer the Arrowverse as opposed to the Netflix Defenders shows. So when it comes to TV, DC are probably a lot better, in my eyes anyway. I mean, if you have got a different opinion, let me know down below in the comments. And with all that said and done, it's pretty even between the two, I'd say. So I know there's a lot of fans that will probably argue more for Marvel or maybe more for DC, but I enjoy them both, so I'm on the fence as to say which one is better. I don't think anyone's particularly better, I think they're just better at certain aspects. Now, a lot of this episode I've been talking about this idea of cohesion, interconnected universes, and I really like that idea. So I want to try something, just a quick segment. I'm not going to tell any stories because I haven't really got any, shenanigans relating to superheroes and stuff. But I wanted to try a new segment called In My Head. So basically it's just ideas that I've got in my head. And I've got an idea, I've written stories, ideas for an interconnected universe, kind of like a comic book universe essentially, and it's called Tales of the Universe, where anything and everything is possible, from aliens to superheroes to time travel to vigilantes on the street just kicking ass. But the way I'd approach it as being a connected universe, like I said, I'd tell it as an anthology series, so have one specific character that I tell one story, make a solid story, and then have subtle hints to the other stories. So one of my ideas is a character from the planet Pluto working for the Plutonian royal family and then being accused of being a traitor essentially, and that could go on after its own story and do that. And then interconnect that with maybe a time travel story where a man from 2077 creates time travel or invents time travel and he messes around with something in the past which affects that character. It'd be a subtle nod, but just to make sure that the whole story is, they're all connected within the same universe. And I'd write stories, comic books, graphic novels, whatever you want to call them. I'd write it all in that style, so it's just like subtle hints and references. And then once the universe has been established and characters have been, properly introduced, then eventually cross them over. So characters like a gender-confused fairy warlord, or a guy with a special power ring that's come from a fallen comet. So that's how I'd approach a universe that's connected. So maybe like the MCU, or the Arrowverse, or comic books just in general. If this idea of a connected universe interests you, let me know down in the comments below, or if you've come from Facebook, let me know on there. But with all that being said, I think it's time to wrap up today's podcast. Thank you for listening, I hope you've enjoyed what you've heard, and as always, enjoy a cuppa.